This week's episode, we're looking at head injuries in rugby, which is obviously very appropriate given the various stories that are ongoing. We're still awaiting the details of the Irish case that's going to be taken against the IRFU, the details of the case being taken against the Rugby Football Union and the Welsh Rugby Football Union in the UK made the papers earlier in the week. Stephen Kisbey-Green has been crunching some numbers for us to have a look. Specifically, you wanted to look at the new rule that's being trialled in the Southern Hemisphere around red cards. A lot of people will be unfamiliar with this.
Yeah, so the Super Rugby this year have trialled a 20-minute red card rule. Basically, it means that any red card, no matter what it's for, it could be 2 yellow cards, it could be a straight red for a high tackle or whatever the case may be. After 20 minutes, that player can get replaced. So the player themselves can't come back on, but after 20 minutes of having served the red card, then a new player can come on in place to bring the teams back up to 15 aside.
We used to do this in the GAA for the black card originally, and then everyone was like, that's nonsense, what are you doing? And now it's stopped.
It makes no sense because it doesn't actually doesn't discourage the issues that the red cards cause. But yeah, so basically what I've done is I've crunched some numbers to see the correlation between the number of red cards received by teams that have this red card rule in place versus the traditional red card, and then also I've had a look at how certain teams and like basically the head injuries. Now obviously there's no guarantee that every red card would have something to do with a head injury, but there is a correlation between the amount of head injuries and red cards issued.
Can I just ask, how long has this 20-minute red card rule been in place?
So the Rainbow Cup trialled it last year for the first time. They were the first ones to try it.
Remind me of all of it. The Rainbow Cup was the precursor to the South African teams coming into the Magners League.
It was that weird, that very weird thing that Benetton won somehow.
Okay, so that was the one where we were all in our own countries, but we weren't supposed to be, and then we all ended up playing each other again. And
exactly, yeah, that was
sick of the side of each other.
That was it exactly.
And did Benetton really win it?
Benetton beat the Bulls in the final. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So not many people were paying that much attention to that tournament because it didn't mean anything, and it was kind of like rugby for rugby's sake during COVID, which, in fairness, they had to keep the show on the road, and everybody understands why they did it. But so you could say it was under the radar.
Yeah, we went under the radar for the Northern Hemisphere at least, and then in Super Rugby this year they said they were going to carry on with it, and so far under that new system under that law trial, 22 red cards were issued throughout Super Rugby.
Okay.
Now that's in just 91 matches. From pre-season, from the round robins all the way through to the final.
And Super Rugby is now the tournament between Australia and New Zealand.
Between Australia and New Zealand, and then there's one Fijian side,
okay,
and one Samoan side.
Okay.
Neither of which are based in Fiji or Samoa. They're based in New Zealand. But so that averages out to one red card every 4 matches.
Okay.
Which doesn't sound too drastic when you think of it on its own. But if you compare that to, say, the URC, which is that lovely tournament that everyone loves on this side of the world, 135 matches were played and only 15 red cards were issued. That's an average of 1 red card every 9 games.
Okay.
So there's almost double the amount of red cards per game or per round in the Southern Hemisphere at the moment. Then we look at the English Premiership, which has a reputation for being the more physical, the more red card worthy type sort of league up here.
Throwing shade at the Premiership, go for it.
I mean, it's full of South Africans. Why not? Total of 22 red cards were issued throughout the last season. So that averages to 1 red card every 7 matches.
Okay.
So a little bit closer to New Zealand, but it's not to the Super Rugby rather, and it's but not.
What was the URC again? 1 and 9.
1 and 9. Yeah.
Right. So 1 and 9 URC, 1 and 7 for England.
And then compare that to international test matches this year, 2022. There've been 44 matches played, and a total of 6 red cards have been issued. So again, that's 1 in every 7 matches. So on average, in a professional, based on that stats, in a professional environment, you should be looking at 1 in 7 matches played, you get a red card. The Super Rugby have more than that.
Okay, so that's since the law changes have happened.
Yeah, it's just for the sake of the 20-minute red card rule.
Okay.
Now, why this is concerning, particularly this week, is that the South African, New Zealand, Australia and Argentina rugby, SANZAR, has just announced that they're going to continue the trial during the Rugby Championship, which starts next week. Now,
and the Rugby Championship is the international tournament held between South Africa, New Zealand,
Australia and
Argentina.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, this week in particular, it comes off the back of, as you've rightfully pointed out, the head injury assessment, also the head injury cases going on in Northern Hemisphere. And it got me thinking, why are there no cases currently that we know of going against any of the Southern Hemisphere teams? Maybe it's because there might not be as many retirees because of concussion or whatever. I dug into the numbers and I found a total of 61 professional players have retired from any form of professional rugby, men or women, since 2010. So it's not a huge amount, but these
significant
are
though, yeah.
But these are specifically with concussion being listed as either the definitive reason for their retirement or a contributing factor. So there's an asterisk here on one of the figures, because one of the figures, it wasn't a concussion, but it was a head injury.
Okay. I mean, head injuries, I think, it may well be interchangeable down the line when it comes to what the specific causes are. And like subconcussive blows have also ended up resulting in CTE, has now been an established fact in some cases in the States. So you don't actually need to have a full-blown concussion to end up suffering the impacts of the head injury. So I think potentially these 61, that figure is low, because there might be people who retired and it hasn't been made public the reason that they retired or whatever. And
exactly.
Sometimes it's for insurance purposes. We never find out exactly why a player retired.
So these are just with them being deliberately listed as concussion-related symptoms. So of these 61 players that have retired since 2010 with concussion-related symptoms, 20 of them have been from New Zealand. Now, you would think, okay, cool, maybe that means that New Zealand have a higher than average number of professional rugby players. Now, unfortunately, the term professional rugby player is different in every country, so there's no way to actually find a definitive number of how many players there are. But what we can do is look at registered rugby players. Now, those are players that are registered with any union, club level, but they have to be senior. They can't be like junior, they can't be teenagers, they can't be in school or whatever. So on the list of the total number of registered players, so basically the number of rugby players that a country produces, South Africa have the most, then France, and then New Zealand. So New Zealand are actually the third highest rugby producing country, and yet they have the most concussion-related retirees from professional rugby. What's even more shocking is the country that has slightly the second most retirees from concussion is England, and they have 10. So New Zealand have double the amount of concussion-related retirements, and yet they're the third most. They play the third most amount of rugby as a nation.
So, to simplify this, what we're saying is that the 20-minute rule has resulted in more red cards. But your concern is that actually it's not having an impact on the head injuries.
Well, yeah, it's what I'm sort of correlating in the fact that the 20-minute the idea of a red card is to reduce the amount of the dangerous tackles and other sort of it's to punish for cynical and dirty play, and for obviously to reduce danger. Now, the countries that so obviously New Zealand rugby and Australian rugby are the only two countries at the moment that have been playing with the 20-minute red card rule. So out of SANZAAR, the organisation that runs the Rugby Championship, they would be the only two that would fight for this to continue with this red card rule, because South Africa and Argentina haven't played with it. And yet, in spite of that, and in spite of their numbers of concussions and concussion-related retirements, and the average age of retirement is 29, by the way, so it's a very young age for people to retire from concussion. In spite of those drastic figures, New Zealand and Australian rugby are still fighting for a 20-minute red card rule, because they would rather have 15 people on the pitch than their players being able to have a full career without worry, or at least that's what the numbers would suggest to me.
Okay, so these are countries that have suffered retirements at a higher level, and so therefore you would assume that they're more interested and more invested in changing the patterns of behaviour which have resulted in those retirements. However, you don't think this new rule convinces people to change their pattern of behaviour because the punishment isn't severe enough?
Yes, and from what we've seen, unfortunately, there's no actual metrics of what could have been, what yellow cards could have been a red card, and also it's difficult to find exactly what the red cards were for. But we have seen that there's clearly a higher number of red cards during the 20-minute red card rule than not. So people are less likely to be concerned about receiving a red card.
Obviously, because the punishment is far less. Right, just a reminder, Meaningful Metrics and Off the Ball in partnership with Whoop, the personalised digital fitness and health coach that helps you unlock your inner potential. Check out whoop.com for more. So if red cards are going up with the 20-minute rule, does that not mean that actually it's having an impact? It's freeing referees up to give red cards for stuff that previously they would have given yellow cards for fear of ruining the game, and now they're actually going to do it, which might have the desired impact.
In theory, that could be.
Bear in mind, the player can't come back. So,
yeah,
if I get sent off while my team only suffers for 20 minutes, which is bad, but I'm not coming back.
Yeah, but it's not like. But it's a team game, and like the player might find themselves, okay, cool. I'm off. Maybe I should rework that. But if the coach isn't seeing that negative impact on the entire team, they won't necessarily go out of their way to coach better tackling techniques.
No, and the other thing is that generally players who are getting red cards for high tackles head to head, if they're capable of coming back on, or if they're not, and that's one thing. But the damage that they're inflicting on their opponents has tended to end games/tours of players who have been on the receiving end. Like, and this is, both Ireland have meted this out, and Ireland have been victims of this just on the recent South African New Zealand tour. So there's a lot of work to do here for the culture to shift to a point where it's completely, like, if you think back, rugby has done a reasonable job in stamping out most of the on-field violence that would have characterised the game. Like, you look back now at the rooking and the raking, and if you're on the wrong side of the rook, you deserve to get raked with the hobnail boots. That doesn't happen anymore. There's less of that stamping. I mean, almost none. They were able to stamp that out. Pardon the pun. But they haven't yet been able to fix the tackle technique of bigger and increasingly bigger men who are less fleet of foot when somebody goes past them and there's a lean and the head hits. So
yeah.
Your argument essentially here is that none of the stats would back up the 20-minute rule yet.
There's also one very particular, slightly worrying statistic that I have here. I've found two studies done in 2020, one by a South African organisation, one by a New Zealand organisation. I couldn't actually purchase the stats for the South African study, so the only stats I've got are from the New Zealand study. But what they surveyed 416 school rugby players, men and women, boys and girls, and they found that 69% of them had displayed some form of concussion-related symptom, and 31% of those 416 had confirmed medical diagnosis of a concussion. So that's a large portion of rugby players in New Zealand. Just
recap that again. So the New Zealand Science Institute did a survey. It was actually paid for, financed by the New Zealand Rugby Union, and they found that 70% of kids, essentially,
just under, yeah,
have had concussion-like symptoms.
Yes,
from playing rugby.
Granted, it's a base of 416 players, so they didn't obviously survey every single player in school rugby player in the country, but of 416 players, just under 70% had received a concussion-like symptom or symptoms, and 31% were diagnosed with a concussion. And then they then further checked whether or not the players themselves knew what the New Zealand Rugby guidelines were around concussion, and only 63%, so less than 2/3 of the players knew anything about the guidelines around concussion that New Zealand had put in place.
Yeah, rugby's in trouble. There's no two ways about it. Anything else?
That's all from me.
All right, Stephen, good stuff. That's this week's episode of Meaningful Metrics and Off the Ball in partnership with Whoop, the personalised digital fitness and health coach that helps you unlock your inner potential. Check out whoop.com for more.
Meaningful Metrics on Off the Ball.
In partnership with Whoop, the personalised digital fitness and health coach that helps you unlock your inner potential. See whoop.com for more.